Leaky gut is not just a buzzword, it's a very real breakdown in the protective barrier of your intestines. Normally, the gut lining is designed to act as a selective filter. Nutrients pass through into the bloodstream while harmful substances are kept out. But when that lining becomes damaged, it develops microscopic holes. Through these leaks, food particles, toxins, and microbes slip directly into the bloodstream where they don't belong. The immune system, on constant alert, reacts as if under attack. The result is persistent inflammation, hormonal disruption, and a body that starts storing fat deep within the abdominal cavity. This is where most people are misled. Conventional thinking still frames belly fat as a simple equation of calories in versus calories out. Eat less, move more. That's the standard prescription. Yet many who follow this advice strictly find they lose little or no fat from the waistline. The missing piece of the puzzle is that the body's fat storage is not controlled by calorie math alone. It's governed by signals of inflammation, hormones like insulin and cortisol, and whether the gut wall is intact or leaking. If the barrier is compromised, the body interprets this as danger, and one of its survival strategies is to stockpile visceral fat around the organs. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Our ancestors ate natural, unprocessed, nutrient-dense foods, meats, fish, fibrous plants, berries, and nuts. These foods supported microbial diversity and protected the gut lining. In contrast, today's processed diets are loaded with sugars, industrial seed oils, and chemical additives, agents that damage the gut wall and feed harmful microbes. Over time, the barrier fails and the cascade begins. Toxins leak, the immune system flares, hormones lose balance, and fat accumulates exactly where it does the most damage. Repairing the gut lining is therefore not optional. It is the overlooked key to unlocking fat burning and restoring true metabolic health. Inside the gut wall lies a sophisticated barrier system designed to protect us from the outside world. The inner lining of the intestine is only 1 cell thick, yet it is held together by structures known as tight junctions. These act like gatekeepers, allowing beneficial nutrients to pass through into circulation while keeping out bacteria, toxins, and large food molecules that could trigger an immune response. Under conditions of stress, nutrient deficiencies, infections, or a diet high in processed food, these tight junctions begin to loosen. Microscopic gaps appear in the barrier, and substances that should remain confined to the gut lumens slip across into the bloodstream. This process is what we call intestinal permeability or leaky gut. Once these foreign particles escape into circulation, the immune system identifies them as threats. It mobilizes defenses, releasing inflammatory messengers called cytokines, producing antibodies and activating white blood cells. This would be an appropriate and even life-saving response if it happened occasionally in the context of an acute infection. The trouble arises when the leakage is continuous. Day in and day out, the immune system never stands down. Instead, it wages a constant war within the body, and the battleground becomes systemic inflammation, low grade, silent, but relentless. Chronic inflammation is not a passive background condition. It actively alters the way your metabolism operates. Inflammation interferes with insulin signaling, which makes it harder for your cells to access glucose for energy. As insulin resistance develops, the pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, a fat storage hormone. Elevated insulin locks fat away in adipose tissue and prevents its release for burning. At the same time, inflammation raises cortisol, another hormone that promotes the deposition of fat deep inside the abdomen, wrapped around the liver, pancreas, and intestines. This is visceral fat, and it is far more dangerous than the subcutaneous fat under the skin because it releases inflammatory chemicals of its own, creating a vicious cycle. What begins as a compromised gut lining leads directly to a body trapped in fat storage mode. The fat does not accumulate because of weak willpower, laziness, or a failure to count calories correctly. It accumulates because the immune system is locked in a defensive posture, flooding the body with inflammatory signals that reprogram metabolism towards storage rather than expenditure. Every meal containing processed sugars, refined flours, or industrial oils adds fuel to this fire by further irritating the gut and keeping the barrier open. Consider how difficult it is for someone in this state to lose weight through conventional means. They may cut calories, skip dessert, or spend hours exercising, but the metabolic machinery is still jammed. With inflammation blocking fat burning, the body resists letting go of visceral fat. Instead of being burned, fat is hoarded, and energy is drawn primarily from glucose, leaving individuals tired, hungry, and prone to cravings. This is why people often describe dieting as an uphill battle they cannot win, no matter how disciplined they are. Understanding leaky gut shifts the entire perspective. The real obstacle to fat loss is not overeating, but systemic inflammation rooted in gut permeability. Repairing the intestinal barrier reduces the constant influx of foreign particles, allowing the immune system to stand down. As inflammation eases, insulin sensitivity improves, cortisol stabilizes, and the body once again feels safe to release fat from storage. Visceral fat, which had been clamped tightly around the organs, begins to shrink as the metabolic environment changes. This science explains why so many conventional diet programs fail. They never address the immune and inflammatory dimension of metabolism. Without closing the leaks in the gut wall, fat burning remains blocked. By contrast, when the gut lining is restored, the immune system calms, inflammation recedes, and the same dietary and lifestyle changes that once felt futile suddenly begin to produce results. The path to fat loss is not paved with willpower but with biology, and biology begins in the gut. When the gut lining is damaged and begins to leak, the impact reaches far beyond digestion. One of the first systems to be thrown off balance is the delicate network of hormones that govern metabolism, hunger energy, and fat storage. The immune activation triggered by leaky gut floods the body with inflammatory chemicals, and these signals directly interfere with how hormones are produced, released, and received by their target tissues. Hormones are like the body's internal messengers, and when the communication lines are scrambled, the body falls into chaos. One of the most obvious consequences is the elevation of cortisol, the stress hormone. Inflammation itself is perceived by the body as a form of stress, so cortisol is continually released to keep the immune system in check. While short bursts of cortisol are protective, chronic elevation has damaging consequences. It pushes the body into survival mode, keeping blood sugar high and encouraging fat storage, especially deep in the abdomen. Visceral fat cells are highly responsive to cortisol, and they grow quickly under its influence. This is why people under chronic stress or dealing with persistent inflammation often find themselves gaining weight around the waist, even if their diet hasn't changed dramatically. At the same time, insulin, another critical hormone, is also affected. Inflammation disrupts insulin sensitivity, meaning cells no longer respond properly to insulin's signal to take in glucose from the blood. The pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, but instead of solving the problem, this excess insulin locks fat away and prevents it from being used as energy. Over time, high insulin keeps the body in constant storage mode, making it nearly impossible to burn visceral fat. The gut's influence over hormones does not stop at cortisol and insulin. Inside the intestines lives a vast population of microbes that communicate directly with the brain and endocrine system. When the gut microbiome is balanced and diverse, these microbes help regulate hunger and satiety hormones like leptin and ghrelin. Leptin is supposed to signal when we've eaten enough, while ghrelin stimulates appetite. But with dysbiosis, a disturbed microbiome driven by leaky gut, this communication system malfunctions. Leptin resistance can develop, so the brain never gets the signal that we are full. Meanwhile, ghrelin can remain elevated, driving powerful cravings for sugar and processed foods that further damage the gut lining. This creates a feedback loop where poor gut health perpetuates poor food choices, and poor food choices worsen gut health. The disruption even mimics conditions that many people assume are separate hormonal problems. For example, when inflammation from a leaky gut affects the thyroid, symptoms may appear that resemble hypothyroidism, fatigue, sluggish metabolism, cold intolerance, and weight gain. Yet in many cases, the thyroid gland itself is not the root problem. It is the inflammation preventing thyroid hormones from being properly converted or utilized. Similarly, chronic stress on the adrenal glands from constant cortisol demand can produce symptoms people often describe as adrenal fatigue, such as exhaustion, brain fog, and difficulty coping with stress. Estrogen metabolism is also influenced by gut bacteria, and when dysbiosis takes hold, it can lead to imbalances that mimic estrogen dominance, with symptoms such as bloating, mood swings, and stubborn fat around the hips and belly. When the gut is leaking, hormones do not operate in their normal, balanced rhythms. Instead, they fire in distorted patterns that signal the body to conserve energy and store fat. The person experiencing this may feel frustrated, believing they lack discipline, when in reality their biology has been hijacked. The cravings, the stubborn belly fat, the fatigue, and the hormonal symptoms are not signs of weak willpower, but of a gut barrier that has lost integrity. Restoring the gut lining helps reverse this cascade. When the leaks are sealed and inflammation subsides, cortisol levels can normalize, insulin sensitivity improves, leptin and ghrelin signaling recalibrate, and thyroid and sex hormones regain their balance. Only then does the body shift out of survival mode and feel safe enough to release visceral fat. The lesson is clear. When the gut leaks, hormones go haywire, and no amount of calorie counting will override a system that is biologically programmed to cling to fat until the underlying imbalance is corrected. Most people think of body fat in terms of what they can pinch around the waist or see in the mirror. But there is another, more insidious type of fat that rarely gets enough attention. Visceral fat is stored deep inside the abdominal cavity, packed tightly around vital organs such as the liver, pancreas, and intestines. Unlike the fat under the skin, which primarily serves as an energy reserve and insulation, visceral fat is metabolically active. It behaves less like storage tissue and more like a rogue endocrine organ, constantly secreting inflammatory chemicals and hormones that disrupt normal body function. This is where the connection to leaky gut becomes so important. When the intestinal barrier breaks down, foreign particles seep into the bloodstream and spark widespread inflammation. That chronic inflammation alters hormonal signals, blocks fat burning, and encourages the accumulation of visceral fat. Over time, the fat itself becomes a source of inflammation. Adipose tissue in the abdomen releases cytokines and free fatty acids directly into the portal vein, which leads straight to the liver. The liver, bombarded by these inflammatory molecules, develops insulin resistance and fat buildup, setting the stage for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The vicious cycle is clear. Leaky gut creates inflammation, inflammation promotes visceral fat, and visceral fat feeds the fire of inflammation even further. It becomes a self-sustaining loop that places an enormous burden on the body. The pancreas, struggling under the pressure of insulin resistance, is forced to churn out more insulin. Elevated insulin not only drives further fat storage, but also pushes blood sugar higher, paving the way toward type 2 diabetes. Cardiovascular health takes a hit as well. The inflammatory chemicals secreted by visceral fat damage blood vessels, promote plaque formation, and raise blood pressure, all of which dramatically increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. Visceral fat also undermines the health of the brain and accelerates aging at the cellular level. Chronic inflammation from the gut and abdominal fat impairs mitochondrial function, the energy factories inside cells, leading to fatigue and reduced resilience. Oxidative stress builds up, damaging DNA and shortening telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of chromosomes that determine cellular lifespan. People with high levels of visceral fat are therefore not just at risk for chronic disease, but for accelerated biological aging, meaning their bodies wear out faster than their years would suggest. Unlike subcutaneous fat, which might fluctuate with changes in diet or exercise, visceral fat is notoriously stubborn because it is tied to immune and hormonal dysfunction. You cannot simply starve it away with calorie restriction or run it off with hours of cardio. As long as the gut remains leaky and the inflammatory cascade continues, the body will defend this fat as though it were essential. In evolutionary terms, this might have been adaptive, storing fat around the organs as a survival mechanism during times of chronic stress or infection. But in the modern context of constant dietary insults and microbial imbalance, it has become a silent killer. This is why visceral fat should never be dismissed as merely a cosmetic concern. A slightly rounded belly may look harmless on the outside, but if it signals a buildup of fat inside the abdomen, it is a red flag that the body is in a state of systemic imbalance. It tells us that the gut is under assault. The immune system is on high alert and the metabolic system is breaking down. Research consistently shows that even individuals who appear lean on the outside can harbor dangerous deposits of visceral fat and face the same heightened risks of diabetes, heart disease, liver dysfunction, and early aging as those who are visibly overweight. Addressing visceral fat, then, is not about vanity or fitting into a smaller clothing size. It is about restoring internal balance and protecting the body's most vital systems. The starting point is not simply dieting harder, but repairing the gut barrier, calming the immune system, and rebalancing hormones. Only when inflammation is reduced at its root will the body release visceral fat and shift back toward true health. Understanding this connection reframes belly fat not as a personal failing, but as a warning signal, a call to restore gut health before deeper problems take hold. Repairing a damaged gut lining is not about chasing quick fixes or gimmicks. It is about systematically rebuilding the body's first line of defense. The intestinal barrier is like a firewall, and once it has been compromised, the immune system cannot stand down until the gaps are closed. Healing the gut is a process of removing the insults that weaken it while providing the raw materials and conditions for repair. With time, this allows the barrier to regain its integrity, inflammation to subside, and fat metabolism to normalize. The first step is removing the common irritants that perpetuate permeability. Gluten found in wheat and other grains is notorious for loosening tight junctions in the gut wall, even in people who are not diagnosed with celiac disease. Sugar and refined carbohydrates feed harmful microbes and drive further inflammation. Industrial seed oils such as soybean, canola, and corn oil promote oxidative stress and make cell membranes more fragile. Alcohol is another direct irritant to the gut lining, while artificial sweeteners disrupt the microbiome and interfere with the gut-brain axis. By stripping away these inflammatory triggers, you take away the constant assault that prevents the gut from healing. Once the insults are removed, the body needs building blocks to repair the damaged tissue. Glutamine, an amino acid, is one of the most important fuels for the cells lining the intestine. It provides the energy required for them to regenerate and close up the microscopic leaks. Zinc plays a crucial role in maintaining the structure of tight junctions and also boosts immune resilience, which is often compromised in those with gut damage. Collagen and its component amino acids, like glycine and proline, supply the structural framework needed for rebuilding the intestinal wall. By incorporating bone broth, collagen peptides, or targeted supplements, you are literally giving the gut the scaffolding it needs to rebuild. Reducing inflammation inside the gut and throughout the body is equally important. Omega-3 fatty acids from sources like fatty fish, flax, and chia seed help calm overactive immune responses. They compete with the pro-inflammatory omega-6 fats found abundantly in processed foods and restore a healthier balance. Polyphenols, the antioxidant compounds in foods like green tea, berries, olive oil, and colorful vegetables, act like natural extinguishers of oxidative stress. Together, these nutrients reduce the inflammatory fire that keeps the gut lining under siege. Rebalancing the gut microbiome is another essential step. A diverse and resilient microbial community helps maintain the barrier by producing short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which directly nourish gut cells. Fermented foods such as sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, and yogurt introduce beneficial bacteria that crowd out harmful strains. Prebiotic fibers from foods like onions, garlic, asparagus, and green bananas feed these microbes, ensuring they thrive and produce the compounds necessary for barrier repair. For some, targeted probiotic supplements can provide an additional boost, but real food sources are often the most sustainable way to restore microbial diversity. It is important to recognize that healing the gut lining does not happen overnight. Years of processed food, chronic stress, environmental toxins, and microbial imbalance cannot be undone in a week. The process is more like tending to a garden. You clear out the weeds, provide the right soil, water, and nutrients, and then allow nature to take its course. Over weeks and months, the intestinal barrier gradually strengthens, the immune system calms, and the vicious cycle of inflammation and fat storage begins to reverse. Approaching gut healing with patience also reframes how we think about long-term health. Instead of seeing it as a diet fad or a temporary cleanse, it becomes a lifestyle that protects against disease. A strong intestinal lining is not just about avoiding bloating or indigestion. It shields the entire body from chronic inflammation, hormonal chaos, and visceral fat accumulation. By making consistent choices, avoiding irritants, nourishing with the right nutrients, and cultivating microbial balance, you are rebuilding the firewall that evolution designed to protect you. In the end, the reward is not just a slimmer waistline, but a body that is more resilient, metabolically flexible, and safeguarded against the chronic diseases that so often trace back to a leaking gut. Inside the gut resides a vast ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, and other microbes that outnumber our human cells and influence almost every aspect of health. This community, known as the microbiome, is not just a passive collection of organisms. It acts like a control center for metabolism, immunity, and even behavior. When it is diverse and balanced, it supports efficient energy use, regulates appetite, and keeps inflammation in check. But when it falls into dysbiosis, a state of imbalance where harmful species outcompete beneficial ones, the consequences are profound weight gain, persistent cravings, hormonal disruption, and systemic inflammation that locks fat away in storage. Gut bacteria play a direct role in how we metabolize food. Healthy strains ferment fibers and resistant starches into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate, and acetate. These compounds nourish the intestinal lining, reinforce barrier integrity, and improve insulin sensitivity. They also signal to the brain and peripheral tissues that energy is plentiful, which allows the body to burn rather than hoard fat. When microbial diversity is high, this system works smoothly, protecting against obesity and metabolic disease. In contrast, dysbiosis reduces the production of these beneficial metabolites, leaving the gut wall vulnerable and the metabolism sluggish. Harmful microbes thrive on sugar and processed foods. They extract energy too efficiently, meaning that more calories are pulled from the same meal, and then they direct those calories toward fat storage rather than fuel. These microbes also release endotoxins that slip into circulation when the gut is leaky, stimulating inflammation that further promotes visceral fat accumulation. Worse still, they hijack hunger signaling by producing chemicals that influence neurotransmitters. Dysbiotic bacteria can drive intense cravings for the very foods that sustain them, such as sweets, refined carbs, and junk food. What feels like a lack of willpower is often the voice of an imbalanced microbiome manipulating the brain. Reversing this requires shifting the food supply inside the gut toward what nourishes beneficial microbes. Fiber is at the center of this strategy. Soluble fibers found in oats, apples, beans, and flaxseed feed microbes that produce short-chain fatty acids. Insoluble fibers from vegetables, seeds, and whole plants add bulk and speed transit, preventing harmful bacteria from taking over. Resistant starches found in foods like cooked and cooled potatoes, green bananas, and legumes act as a slow-burning fuel for beneficial bacteria deep in the colon, where they generate butyrate, one of the most protective compounds for gut health. Polyphenols, the colorful compounds in berries, cocoa, olive oil, and green tea also play a pivotal role. While they are often celebrated for their antioxidant properties, many of their benefits come from their interaction with microbes. Polyphenols selectively feed beneficial strains, suppress pathogens, and enhance the production of metabolites that improve fat metabolism and reduce inflammation. This explains why diets rich in colorful plants are consistently associated with lower rates of obesity and chronic disease. Equally important as feeding the good bacteria is starving out the harmful ones. This means drastically reducing sugar, refined carbohydrates, and ultra-processed foods that allow pathogenic microbes and yeast to dominate. When these food sources dry up, the population shifts and the harmful organisms lose their foothold. Adding in fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, and yogurt introduces live beneficial microbes that can further tilt the balance in favor of diversity. Over time, this ecosystem rebuilds itself, but it requires consistent choices rather than temporary interventions. The connection between microbiome balance and fat loss becomes clear when you look at the big picture. A balanced microbiome calms the immune system, reduces inflammation, strengthens the gut barrier, regulates appetite, and improves insulin sensitivity, all of which are essential for shedding visceral fat. Without addressing this root level, weight loss strategies remain surface level and often unsustainable. Calorie restriction might produce temporary results, but unless the microbiome is restored, cravings, energy imbalances, and inflammation will pull the body back toward fat storage. By deliberately cultivating microbial diversity, you are not just working on digestion, you are reprogramming metabolism. The bacteria inside you become allies rather than saboteurs, amplifying the effects of healthy eating and protecting against the diseases linked to visceral fat. This is why microbiome restoration is not an optional add-on, but the very foundation of lasting fat loss and metabolic health. The key is to think less about suppressing calories and more about feeding the right ecosystem. When the good bugs thrive, the body naturally moves toward balance, and weight loss becomes the inevitable outcome of a system finally working as it was designed. Healing a leaky gut and reversing the chain reaction that leads to belly fat begins with a clear, structured plan. The first step is to remove the irritants that keep the gut wall under constant assault. Processed foods, refined sugars, gluten containing grains, industrial seed oils, alcohol, and artificial sweeteners all chip away at the intestinal barrier and feed the microbes that promote inflammation. Clearing them from the diet gives the gut lining the breathing space it needs to begin repair. Think of it as taking away the hammer that has been pounding on the wall so the cracks can finally be patched. With the irritants gone, the next step is adding in the raw materials that the gut needs to heal. Nutrients like L-glutamine fuel the cells of the intestinal wall so they can regenerate. Zinc strengthens the structure of tight junctions, while collagen and amino acids from bone broth or supplemental peptides provide the scaffolding needed to knit the tissue back together. Anti-inflammatory allies such as omega-3 fats from wild-caught fish and antioxidants from colorful vegetables reduce immune overactivity and create an environment where repair can happen more efficiently. Feeding beneficial bacteria is equally important because they act as long-term guardians of the gut wall. A steady intake of fiber from vegetables, legumes, flaxseed, and chia provides the substrate they ferment into short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which reinforce the barrier. Resistant starches from cooked and cooled potatoes. Green bananas or lentils reach deep into the colon, nourishing microbes that keep the ecosystem stable. Polyphenol-rich foods such as berries, green tea, dark chocolate, and olive oil selectively encourage beneficial strains and suppress pathogens, creating a microbiome that works with you rather than against you. Lifestyle choices are the glue that holds this blueprint together. Intermittent fasting or simply spacing out meals allows the gut time to rest and repair, reducing the constant wear and tear of snacking. Sleep is critical as most gut healing and tissue regeneration occur during deep rest. Aiming for 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep restores balance to cortisol and insulin. Stress reduction techniques such as meditation, walking in nature, breath work, or yoga lower the hormonal signals that drive gut permeability and visceral fat storage. Movement throughout the day, not just structured exercise, but also walking, stretching, and standing keeps circulation and lymphatic flow strong, supporting the removal of inflammatory waste products. To picture how this might look in daily life, imagine waking up and starting the day with a glass of water and perhaps some green tea to provide polyphenols without spiking blood sugar. A nourishing breakfast could be skipped entirely if you are fasting, or it could be a plate of eggs cooked in olive oil with spinach and avocado for those who prefer to eat in the morning. Lunch might be a colorful salad with wild salmon, leafy greens, olives, and pumpkin seeds dressed with extra virgin olive oil and lemon. Dinner could include a serving of grass-fed meat or lentils, paired with roasted vegetables and a small portion of cooked and cooled sweet potato for resistant starch. Fermented foods such as sauerkraut or kimchi can accompany meals to introduce healthy microbes, and bone broth or collagen-rich soups can provide the structural nutrients for repair. Throughout the day, hydration with water and herbal teas supports digestion and detoxification, while avoiding constant grazing gives the gut time to recover between meals. By following this kind of rhythm, the body is not being starved or punished, but supported. Instead of feeling deprived, you feel nourished with stable energy, fewer cravings, and improved clarity of thought. Over time, as the gut lining strengthens, inflammation decreases, cortisol and insulin normalize, and the metabolic machinery begins to unlock stored fat. The belly gradually flattens, not because of extreme restriction, but because the system that once clung to fat is now safe to let it go. The true empowerment comes from recognizing that healing leaky gut is about far more than aesthetics. By rebuilding the intestinal barrier, you are reversing chronic inflammation, balancing hormones, supporting immune resilience, and protecting yourself against the diseases of aging. The shrinking of belly fat becomes just one visible marker of a deeper transformation taking place within, a sign that the body is once again aligned with health and vitality.